Capes on the Couch podcast is for entertainment purposes only. Dr. Issues is a psychiatrist, but he is not your psychiatrist and does not have knowledge of your individual situation. For any personal mental health concerns, please consult your own healthcare providers. For medical emergencies, please call 911 or the designated number in your area immediately. Remember that you are not alone and help is out there.
Hello and welcome to Capes on the Couch, where comics need counseling. I'm Anthony Sitko, joined as always by my good friend, Dr. Issues.
Hello, everybody.
So this is the official issue 9 for Loki. We do apologize for last week with the audio problems, the technical difficulties that prevented us from releasing the episode. It seems that the God of Mischief doesn't really like us talking about him.
Yeah, that's not very surprising. I mean, he usually likes to be in control of everything at once, so...
We'll see. Hopefully this episode comes out a little better than the last one. So as always, you can find us distributed through the Libsyn Network, our website, capesonthecouch.live, where you can tweet at us, Capes on the Couch. We have a Facebook page. As always, our email address is capesonthecouch@gmail.com, and you can find this show on Google Play, iTunes, Stitcher, TuneIn, and YouTube. Like I said, we're going to get into the full Loki episode, but we did start off, before we got into the official Loki episode, we did start off with a discussion of Avengers Infinity War, because that's, after all, why we're doing Loki as a follow-up to Thanos. I've seen the movie twice, once in regular and once in IMAX. If you have the opportunity to see it in IMAX, particularly the full 70mm IMAX, the giant multi-story screen, I cannot recommend enough how amazing it is to see your heroes on a screen that size, and just the aspect ratio from someone who understands filmography and cinematography. It was just something to behold. I will probably see it again at some point, perhaps again this weekend, because even on the second go round, there were things that I picked up that I missed the first go round. And I'm sure if I see it a third time, there will be something else that I see for the first time. That's how complex and intricate the story is.
I'll be honest, I'm not sure my emotions can be rendered asunder again. I just still can't recover quite from the stomach punch of some of the things that happened without giving anything away.
Yeah, obviously we're going to respect no spoilers. We do not want to give anything away. Suffice to say that Thanos has proven without a doubt that he is the most dangerous being in the Marvel Universe, and definitely is worthy of being the villain of 2 consecutive Avengers films.
By the way, we called it. We didn't predict what was going to happen in the next Avengers film, but just the magnitude that Thanos would demonstrate his abilities, and they did not disappoint. Marvel, you've got guts.
That they do. Kudos to the Russo brothers and Kevin Feige and everyone who worked on that movie. It was astounding and worthy of the number 1 highest grossing film opening of all time, and all of the subsequent accolades, I'm sure, that will follow as far as its place on the global ranking for box office receipts and everything. And to think that it all started on the franchise, bringing all the heroes together with today's subject, the God of Mischief himself, Loki Laufey. As I said, it's fitting that we follow up the most recent Avengers film villain with the first one. And Loki is just so integral to the story of the Avengers, both as a film and as a franchise in general. So Loki was created by Stan Lee and Larry Lieber. He was primarily designed by Jack Kirby. His first appearance in Timely Comics Venus number 6, 1949, and this predates, obviously, the Loki that we've come to know and love / hate, depending on what side of the Tumblr fandom you fall on. In that appearance, he was an exiled Olympian god, and he looked nothing like the version that we know. He was basically more akin to like Satan or the ruler of Hades.
Yeah, but still kept a lot of the traits that we knew we were going to see, specifically, being a trickster, very manipulative. All of those things were there, and thankfully they changed the image of Loki, because I think Jack Kirby did a great job in, fleshing out what he was going to be for decades to come.
The more familiar appearance that we know is Journey into Mystery number 85, October 1962, and he's Thor's brother, enemy. Those roles will come into play throughout the decades as we come to find. Bor, the ruler of Asgard, was killed in battle with the frost giants by being turned to snow. So his son Odin refused to help his father. So Bor, before he died, cursed Odin to take the son of a fallen king and raise him as his own. So Odin, who is now the new ruler of Asgard, battles the frost giant, and he wins, and he kills Laufey, the leader of the frost giants, and he finds Laufey's son, Loki. And Loki he's kind of shameful to the frost giants because he's physically small to them, and he's second fiddle to Thor because he's not really physically dominating.
Wait. Laufey's son. Like Thor Odin's son, because he's Odin's son. Was someone going to clue me in on this at some point?
Really?
Just gotta, make sure that I point these things out when I see them,
Well, I'm sure our audience greatly appreciates you pointing this out.
Hey, man, this is highly technical stuff.
Yeah, real technical. So as he becomes an adolescent, he aids and fights alongside Thor and some of the other Asgardians, but his use of strategy and magic lead to him being known as the God of Lies and Mischief. He eventually becomes jealous of Thor and starts resenting him because he's treated differently in Asgard, because he's not technically an Asgardian. So this is where you start to see him transition to the God of Evil, and he repeatedly attempts to overthrow Asgard, defeat his adoptive brother. At one point, he ends up imprisoned in a tree by Odin as punishment, and he could only be free if someone shed a tear for him, and he got released on a technicality because he got a leaf in Heimdall's eye.
Hey, man, don't knock it. It's shed a tear for him. It was definitely him that caused it, and he was thinking about him. That's all there is to it.
No, I totally agree. He's using a loophole, and as an attorney, I could certainly respect that. I think Loki would make a fine litigator. So his interactions with Thor are usually when Thor is Donald Blake, because this is the point early on. This is, again, back in the 60s when Thor was in his human guise as Donald Blake and had to tap his cane on the ground, and then he would transform into Thor, and the cane would turn into Mjolnir. But if he was away from Mjolnir for 60 seconds, he would revert to the Donald Blake form. So most of these interactions are either illusions or hypnotism, because he's trying to get Mjolnir away from Thor so he can get Thor to revert to Donald Blake, because obviously in his human form, he's not much of a threat to Loki. He also attacks Thor through his relationship with Jane Foster, who's the nurse to Donald Blake at the time. Typically, Odin would punish Loki by binding him with Uru chains, Uru being the metal that was used to create Mjolnir.
Yeah, that's an understatement. The number of times he did this, sometimes it was to drip venom from a snake. Other times it was chaining him to other characters. I mean, just incredibly weird, I'm wondering, what was Odin's deal with chains?
He had a bondage thing, I guess. Maybe he was, like Wonder Woman. What was his name? William Hurston, or whatever his name was, the creator, who was very much into bondage. So Odin's got a BDSM thing. Loki obviously is very instrumental in the founding of the Avengers as an enemy. That famous issue, Avengers number 1, 1963, where he gets Hulk to go wild by giving him some sort of illusions and showing him random dangers. So now the Hulk goes rampaging, and then he gets Thor to see a great danger on Earth and travels to the source, because his plan is to get the heroes to all battle each other, except they ultimately figure out, they see through Loki's illusions, and then they turn on him, and then they say, hey, he's the real bad guy. So they battle him, and it's Iron Man, Hulk, Thor, Ant-Man, and the Wasp. And then the Wasp says, well, hey, we should call ourselves the Avengers. And then, lo and behold, Earth's mightiest heroes were born, and the multi-billion-dollar cash franchise was created in 1963. So simpler times, but you see that sort of come into play a little bit in the first Avengers movie. They do play with that notion that Loki is ultimately the one who brings them all together, because he's the threat that no single hero can stand on his own. So again, he's an Avengers villain. He's a Thor villain. He at one point he gains control of the Destroyer armor, which we see in the Thor movie. I thought they did a fantastic job in portraying that. He has some random encounters with the Wrecker, and the Wrecking Crew, and then they gain superpowers, and they almost end up killing Thor. He battles with Surtur and the fire demons. So here he's kind of an anti-hero, but it's for his own means because he wants control of Surtur's realm. At one point, he takes control of Asgard during Odin's sleep. He uses the Enchantress to distract whomever it is that they want, so they have an odd alliance. And then he has a relationship with Hela, and he ends up with a child. So he has a strong connection with Hel. Then we get into the Acts of Vengeance storyline where he disguises himself and he convinces other villains to attack heroes that are not their typical adversaries. So we see some matchups that we've never really seen before in Marvel history.
Yeah, just a comment about that, because the way Loki did that was impressive because he made sure that all of the major villains thought it was their idea. Basically, he described himself as a lackey. Lackey, Loki, get it? It's just impressive that, you plant the seeds of what you want done in other people. That's something that is master manipulation at its best.
Absolutely, and we know that Loki is definitely, if nothing else, a master manipulator. So Thor ends up killing Loki, but then they manipulate the time stream, and he comes back because, surprise, nobody in comics stays dead, except for Uncle Ben. So then there's a prophecy that Loki is going to cause Ragnarok, and we're not talking about the clone. Loki ends up leading his way to lots of characters getting killed. Thor hits the reset button, 9 realms are destroyed, and Asgard begins anew, floating over Oklahoma.
Why? I mean, seriously, I'm throwing out if someone has a lifeline for us, because I don't understand the reasoning behind this.
That's where the wind goes whipping through the plains.
Okay, we get the reference. Or
Asgard with the fringe on top.
Wow. I was going to say simply that it's flyover country, but
Yeah, that too. So then Loki comes back as a lady, and we'll get into the gender issues later on. But so now Loki is a woman. He controls and manipulates his spear to take over Sif's body, and then he joins the Cabal, which is the villain equivalent of the Illuminati, so to speak. And this is part of the Siege storyline. He convinces Thor to resurrect some of his enemies. He time travels to ensure his own adoption.
Yeah, that's a thing. That really happened. He wanted to make sure that he ended up getting adopted by the people that he usually tries to overpower and kill. Okay.
I guess he saw something in the timeline that understood that this is where he needed to be, or this was the best use of him, because had he remained a frost giant, he would not have had access to all of the things and resources that he had, that he ultimately ended up with. So it was a situation where he needed to go through Asgard to become who he eventually becomes.
Yeah.
Predestination paradox, I suppose.
Yeah, it's a good point, I guess, maybe he would have known nothing as Boar's snow. Oh, am I getting that mixed with a Game of Thrones reference? I'm sorry.
Wow. So he brokers a deal to recreate Hell. Then he gets torn apart by the Void and ultimately repents.
Oh, this is a teaser for whenever the heck we get around to it. The Void is basically the other side of the Sentry. Oh, man, we really need to talk about Sentry at some point.
Oh, the Sentry will definitely be an episode because he's a special kind of nuts. So Loki was a woman. Now he's a kid. So he gets resurrected with no memories, but he ends up becoming a street hustler.
Hey, you got to earn a living, right? As a matter of fact, it wasn't just that he was a street hustler. He was doing the 3-card Monty, if you know what that is. Look it up. But the point is, while he's running the 3-card Monty, he has another kid pickpocketing the person that's watching him do the 3-card Monty. So he made sure he won on so many levels. I'm sorry if that excites me for some reason, but, I just think that's genius.
No, it's very effective. I mean, you're going to get the money one way or another. So, and someone like Loki obviously wants to manipulate the rules and the situation to benefit him no matter what. So whether he wins the 3-card Monty, he gets the money. If he loses the 3-card Monty, he still ends up with the money. Either way, he's got your money, like ODB. He is found by Thor, and then he encounters Ikol. It's Loki backwards.
Yeah.
I just don't know how you would pronounce it.
Yeah, basically it's a different version of himself that's trying to get back to having more power, because that's what Loki does.
So he helps Thor out of the underworld during Fear itself. Then he joins the Young Avengers for a time. So he deals with Mother.
Okay. Stick with me here, people. Mother is like this extraterrestrial, parasitic type of being that's able to, control certain situations by using them. But then Loki says, oh, well, that's great because that means I can use Mother, but then realizes Mother's a greater danger. So says, okay, maybe if I get the other Avengers, but then I can manipulate the Avengers and basically defeat them myself. But no, that's not good in the long. It just gets complicated.
Like all things in comics, it gets overly complicated if you think about it too much. So through the help of Wiccan, who's one of the other young Avengers, he gains power and he ages back up to, I guess, a young adult, or what we conceive of as a young adult. So now we get into the Agent of Asgard series, which I thought was just very well done and well written. He becomes friends with this girl called Verity Wills, who always knows when she's being lied to, and I just think it's a fascinating story, and I'm surprised it took 50 years for them to come up with the idea of a person whose very ability is to call Loki out on all of the lies and BS that he tells, and I just think it makes for a fascinating character dynamic. I really like Verity Wills, and maybe we could do her as a separate episode at some point. I know she's a limited character in terms of appearances, but I just think that the ability to call out lies whenever you see them, it makes for a fun, like I said, fun dynamic, certainly with someone who's basically incapable of telling the truth. So he meets King Loki, who's himself in the future. They still viewed him as mischievous, so he ends up reverting to his evil ways and destroys the Earth because he was on a good spin for a while, and then he eventually goes, well, they're going to hate me anyway. I might as well revel in my evil. The song Good and Evil from the Jekyll and Hyde musical comes to mind. Rather try to be good and evil than try to be evil and good. So he's the god of stories. So then he has a metaphysical conversation with himself. His own decisions against himself end up creating a brand new reality, because that's a thing that can happen. And then he survives the incursions in the Secret Wars storyline, and then he literally doesn't know what to do next.
Okay, I'm sorry. I think this was way too ham-fisted. It literally was a sign saying next, and a door, everything, like just walking through saying, I don't know what's next. Oh, really? Come on.
Sometimes I think with a character like Loki, you can make those kinds of artistic decisions and get away with things that you wouldn't otherwise be able to get away with for other characters because of the nature of who Loki is and what he's capable of. I think he gives writers and artists a certain level of freedom to play with the rules and be cliche, dare I say, but because it's Loki, you can play with those tropes in a different way. So for someone else, it may come across as ham-fisted, but for Loki, it's fun.
Okay, I'll give credit because I also remember when he's going through the door, he points out, I may end up being the same person that I was. And I like that because, and I apologize, I'm not trying to ramble. It's just a really quick point. If you ever heard the story of the scorpion and the frog, basically he's admitting that he's a scorpion. And I can respect that.
Yeah. He says, well, what'd you expect from me? I'm the scorpion. I sting. That's what I do. A lengthy background, to be sure, on Loki, but given his importance to Marvel history, his closeness with Thor, who's obviously one of the big three Avengers, and Loki's role as an Avenger-level threat in a number of storylines, it's not easy to quickly summarize Loki and his background and all of the appearances. And this really is just barely scraping the surface. There were so many more stories we could have gone into and appearances and impacts on storylines. But like I said, we're trying to keep it somewhat close to an hour. So the issues, first thing first, as Loki, and we've discussed this a couple of times already, he is a pathological liar. Just straight up lies upon lies upon lies. He, as I said, would make a fantastic litigator, attorney, or politician. But as it stands, he is one of the greatest supervillains in Marvel Universe. And Doc, if you can expound upon what leads to someone becoming a pathological liar, like how do they get to that point where they just feel like manipulating reality?
Okay. There are a few ways. I'll go over first the ones that I don't think qualify. Sometimes people lose touch with reality and they start believing things that no one else can even experience. Loki clearly does not fit into that realm. Loki wants control of absolutely everything around him. And the way he knows to do that is to put people like puppets on strings. He wants to make sure that he controls the narrative, basically. Because once you have control of, as it said in the comics at the end, the god of stories, If you're writing the story, you get to do what you want. Now, why would he get to that point? It basically means that he knew that a head-on approach would not work for him in the circumstances he was dealt. What do I mean by that? He was a frost giant. He was a puny frost giant. So clearly, physical stature had nothing to do with getting ahead in life. If he remained, you already said it, if he remained a frost giant, he was going to get probably pound to a pulp, I guess, or snow or whatever. Anyway, so he ends up with Asgardians. He ends up with a brother that is like basically perfection in almost every way and is willing to boast about it, which in Norse mythology is something that has always been something to be proud of. You want to make sure people know that you're big, you're bad, and you're great.
Well, hey, listen, if I looked like Chris Hemsworth, I would brag about it all the time, too.
Fair enough. But the point is Loki doesn't have that. And people they definitely diss him for it. So he basically says, okay, if a frontal assault isn't going to work in situations, I got to find the back door. And how do you go around? You basically have to find ways to have people basically turn their back. He has to be a trickster. Not only that, you have a situation where he had natural abilities in the arts of magic, which is all about sleight of hand, deception. You know, you have to make people think that they're seeing the truth and then pull it out right from under them. And he just constantly honed his craft. He worked on that non-stop. Now, there is a difference, though. He's a pathological liar, but I wouldn't call him necessarily a compulsive liar. A compulsive liar would be someone who just automatically lies in every situation, but doesn't see the gain of it and actually starts to believe their own lies. It gets ahead of them, you know? So now at this point, it becomes a reflex. It's a defense mechanism. That's something a bit different. And there are characters in the Marvel or DC or any other comic universe, I'm sure, that we could find examples of that do that, but that's not Loki. Loki is always in control. I'm going to actually draw a parallel, though, because the way he schemes is something sometimes I've actually read this where people compared him to the Joker, and the names kind of imply that there might be some connection. Not at all. The Joker's plans are ones where if it goes off the rails, he doesn't care. All right, great. Well, we'll see what happens. Loki, no, if something goes off the rails, you'll get it because he responds pretty quick and angry. I think at this point, Loki is the prototypical character that will always make sure that he leaves you guessing. You think you've got him pegged, and he just flips the script.
Well, it's very interesting. I guess I had never really noticed or heard of the difference between a pathological liar and a compulsive liar. I guess for me, I assumed they were synonyms, but upon your explanation, I definitely see the difference. And I would be curious to see a storyline where Loki ends up becoming a compulsive liar, not a pathological one, and is unable to help himself from lying, even if it is to his own detriment. I think that would be a scenario, dare I say, almost like an inverse liar-liar, where instead of being compelled to tell the truth, he's compelled to lie no matter what. And I think you could get a lot of play out of a storyline in which something happens. Either he tells so many lies that something in his brain snaps, like that episode of South Park where Cartman can't stop from speaking the truth because he's unfiltered so much that anything that comes to his mind, he says. Similarly, do that with Loki and lying.
You're the attorney. You need to copyright that, patent it, trademark, whatever the heck it is you're supposed to do, because that's your storyline and you're keeping it.
Well, again, Marvel, if you're listening, I would be more than happy to come on board and provide some story ideas to you. Hey, listen, they paid that kid $200 for the Spider-Man in a black suit idea that ended up becoming Venom. And listen to our first episode based on Eddie Brock to see how that turned out. In any event, I think, like I said, a story where Loki is forced to become ends up becoming a compulsive liar as opposed to a pathological liar would be fascinating from a story standpoint, particularly if, again, you pair him with Verity Wills. And she is, I guess, sort of the foil or exasperated sidekick to the story because she understands that at this point, everything that comes out of his mouth is a lie. And she just constantly calls him, no, that's not it. Nope, you're lying again. Stop it. You're lying again. Why are you lying so much? Oh, my God.
Insert the theme of The Odd Couple here at any point, ladies and gentlemen. I said insert, not you do it.
Sorry. I'm pretty sure that was the theme of The Odd Couple.
Yes.
Okay. All right. I was right. So the next thing, the other big thing that identifies Loki, aside from the lying, is his relationship with Thor. And I'll just put it, because that is as objective a statement as can possibly make it, his relationship with his adoptive brother Thor. Depending on the story, it's an alliance. Usually it's adversarial. Sometimes there's jealousy, but it is such a dynamic pairing between the two of them. And Doc, I think this is something that certainly some of our listeners, if not a lot of our listeners, and those of us who have siblings can relate to. Sometimes you just want to, sometimes you love your sibling. Sometimes you want to crack them in the jaw.
Yep. We don't condone violence here on this podcast, but
no, except to each other.
But yes, I mean, this is classic, and come on, people, get personal with yourselves. It's okay. We're going to talk about the dynamics of an older sibling and a younger sibling. Older sibling usually wants a certain level of order. They usually are the ones that are used to being in charge, command respect, have that dynamic with their parents because they were the first ones around. Once you get the younger sibling, you're going to end up in a situation where they're going to usually, once again, these are generalities, not automatically applied to everyone. Usually, you're going to end up with them testing the limits. They're going to see what they can get away with at certain points with authority figures. And that creates this natural clash. You have the older sibling trying to perhaps guide them, or not always in a positive way, berating them, punishing them. And you have the younger sibling basically saying, I want my opportunity. I want my chance. I want my fair shot. But also sometimes undercutting, trying to make the other sibling look worse in an effort for them to look better. So that's the natural dynamic amongst all of us in nature. You add godlike powers and abilities to this mix, at some point the fate of the universe. I mean, that's high stakes. So I don't think they're always going to fight fair. We know Loki's not going to fight fair. And even with Thor's virtue, he'll, do what he thinks is necessary to stop his brother. Having said all of that, I'll bring it back once again to us as human beings. We love our siblings. It's a natural bond. We want to see each other do well in general. Maybe not at the expense of us individually, but as a collective, we definitely want things to go well. And there are plenty of instances in the comics and in the movies where we see these glimpses, even if they're not long, these glimpses of where Loki makes a decision that is good for society at large, and Thor acknowledges it. And we actually have instances, usually when Loki's being beaten up or in some bad spots, if he knew that Thor was helping him, he would actually acknowledge it and call him brother. It's incredibly touching. I mean, that's actually a microcosm. I mean, we're used to, and don't get me wrong, I know not all sibling relationships are positive, but for the most part, we can all relate to that idea. You already said it, and I pray to God that you haven't actually attacked anybody that's a sibling, please. We get all of those emotions. It's just magnified, and it's done in such an artistic way that we can't help but feel for these two characters usually. That bond can't be broken, period.
Well, I can say I have not in recent memories hit my sister in the jaw. Maybe when we were younger, we wrestled, and maybe there was this one time we were on the seesaw and I got off as she was walking towards it, or I stepped on it as she was walking towards it, and it popped up, and it may have knocked a tooth out or loose or bloodied a lip or nose or something along those lines. She was about 4. She's fine. She's fine. We've gotten past it now. We've moved well beyond that. But
you have never mentioned that, and I don't know if that's true or not.
No, I'm being dead serious. I'm absolutely being serious. This is going back again. We're going back close to 30 years at this point. But I get your point. My sister is absolutely one of my best friends, and 98% of the time, we're super cool. Every once in a while. And I know for an absolute fact, and I will swear on a stack of whatever holy book you choose, that I get under her skin and she gets under mine, and we move on. The difference is, at least, from the interesting thing in my perspective, is I'm the older sibling, but I don't often act it. She is the younger sibling, but she takes the role of being the authoritarian more for whatever reason. I think it's not just because I never cared if I had that role. I never cared for the responsibility. Whereas I know you are the youngest of your siblings. You have a very different perspective than I do. I'm the older of two. You are the youngest in your family. So you have a different perspective on it than I do.
And you know what? Since you brought it up, I'll definitely go there. Because I'm the youngest, you would think it was because that means I would be more rebellious, that I would take the ultimate chances and everything else. No, I'm going to say that I broke that mold. It was more like I saw what everybody else did, and what happened, I made sure I didn't get in trouble for it. I basically learned from watching other people do things. So thankfully, I didn't have much of that going on in my life. I can't say that I ever got picked on or beaten up or anything. My sisters were always my greatest offenders. That's a fantastic spot to be in, except for times where my dad would call me the prince and say that I was, basically everyone considered me spoiled. And okay, well, enough about me.
Well, my sister definitely was the more rebellious one, and I tried to be her defender, but she didn't want my help. She didn't want my assistance. She never understood the concept of pick your battles. Every battle for her needed to be fought, and every hill need to be died upon, consequences be damned. And I tried to assist her many, many times when I was younger and say, listen, just take the hit now and save yourself the trouble. But no, she was going to rage against the injustice of everything that my parents did. And to this day, she's still that way, even though we are grown adults. And it's just fun to see the difference in the dynamic. But to the point, I think that the sibling relationship between Loki and Thor is fascinating. And at least for me, what I find most touching are the moments in some of the movies, whether it's Loki willing to sacrifice himself somewhat in Thor: The Dark World to save Jane because he understands that it's a greater scope villain than him. And then their relationship really grows in Ragnarok, where Thor basically says to Loki, you betray me, and, I get upset and we fight, and it goes around and around in circle, and you just never go anywhere, and you're just always going to be the same. And he challenges Loki to be better. And I think that's a powerful thing coming from the older sibling, is for him to say, you have these abilities that you could use them for so much more than your own personal enrichment, but you don't, because basically he challenges him to be greater and to do better. And Loki ends up taking that to heart. And we see that in the climax of Ragnarok. Spoilers, somewhat. And then I'm not going to say what happens in Infinity War, but I think there's a continual evolution of that relationship in that film as well. And that's all I'm going to say about that. So the last issue that I want to touch on for Loki is the gender identity and sexuality. And this is something that's really only occurred within the last couple of years in the Agent of Asgard storyline in particular, where we see this fluidity to Loki with respect to sexual identity, gender expression. And I think it speaks very favorably to the minority communities and to the LGBTQ communities, that it's not portrayed as just an extension of his lying, that it's not merely him just saying, well, I'm going to manipulate people and I'm going to do so by pretending to be a woman or by pretending to be gay or bisexual or what have you, that they are both Loki, but they're separate. And I think that's a very respectful thing. And I also know that it's difficult for two heterosexual cisgender men such as ourselves to discuss something like gender identity and sexuality and fluidity in terms without trying to come across as either, insensitive or tone deaf or ham-fisted. But Doc, if you can just delve into a little bit about what this means for Loki to portray this kind of a character and to have it done in the way in which it's portrayed.
Okay, well, first of all, I'm going to give this almost as a disclaimer. I am not talking about gender identity disorder, which is something that you can look up in the DSM. Loki is actually very comfortable in his own skin, or her own skin, or as a child, or as an adolescent. That never comes up as the issue. What I think I can speak to, and you've already done an excellent job introducing it, is that there's a certain level of discomfort that happens to other people when they are placed in situations when they see something that they don't expect. I can give a brief example. I'll try and make it briefer from the previous recording that we did. But the bottom line is there was an article written about someone that was in sports, and it talked about a lot of the mistakes that they made in life. And it did talk about how they were very deceitful and kind of lived a double life. And then after laying that as the groundwork, it talked about their gender transition. And it has a tragic ending. And it implied that somehow that was the same thing. And it was the worst example I could think of for how you're supposed to deal with not just sensitive issues, but honestly, things that are incredibly personal and can't just be explained by an expert. I'm a professional at what I do, but it's not fair for me to say to someone how they should be living their lives in terms of sexuality, in terms of attraction, in terms of what they identify as. That's not fair for me to say. It's not fair for me to determine. So I don't approach it that way. I always approach it as listening. I want to know what the person is experiencing so that I can have a greater understanding of what they are as a human being. Because that's the only thing I need to address. I need to address the things that they consider to be concerning. I don't need to invoke any moral judgment on what they're doing or how they're living their life. I don't have to say things like whether or not it's a choice, because all of those things are distractions to how we interact as human beings. And we see this all the time, constantly. It's a media frenzy with this. And it just distracts from the idea that you have someone else that has other things that are either hindering their progress in what they want to do with their lives or actually being destructive to the people around them. Find out what that is. And it seems like magically all of these other points or aspects of a person's life become inconsequential. How many times have we all, I'm talking just in general, people, how many times have we had conversations with people we don't know? You have no idea what their sexuality is. You have no idea what their background is unless they tell you. You can't just make these broad brushstroke conclusions and expect to basically be the type of person that people can relate to. So I'm just imploring you, please, just have your ears open and have your mind open, because you're going to do much better in terms of how you're going to feel about yourself and how you interact with other people. And that's all I'm going to say about that.
That was certainly a lot better than I could have ever hoped to say it. So I credit you, Doc, for phrasing it that way. I always, at least for me, try to live my life by the example of Fred Rogers. And I know you may laugh, but Fred Rogers, I think, is pretty much one of the pinnacle examples of living a good, wholesome, loving, accepting life. And I want to be the type of person that Fred Rogers would be proud of.
I did chuckle a bit, but not for the reason you're thinking. Because you said Rogers, I just got Mr. Rogers in a Captain America suit stuck in my head.
Well, I think Fred would be very proud of Steve. I think vice versa as well. So that was kind of heavy there. But like I said, I think, again, given the nature of who we are, it's tricky, certainly, to maneuver without trying to come across as virtue signaling while still being respectful of people's differences in the viewpoints and the understanding that I don't know what it is like to go through some of the things that people of certain communities undergo. I try not to take such a heteronormative view at times. It is difficult, But, as I think certainly being aware of privilege is at least the first step.
I just realized something. This is too meta, but that's our pattern with this podcast. We throw lots of jokes. We give personal examples. At some point, we get really deep into something, and then we have to find a way to pull it out because nobody wants to leave on that note.
No, I certainly agree, and I think we did get very deep and heavy there for a second. So I'm going to bring it back a little bit and scale back now, moving into the treatment portion of the show, where we look at the in-universe therapy for starters. How would you begin to treat Loki within the 616 universe?
We've got to even the playing field. Loki knows way too much about just about every way I could be manipulated and tricked and all of that. So I don't care where it is. Like, I don't care if it's on, if it's on Earth. I don't care if it's in some other realm. Like, just something to neutralize this guy. That's the first thought that I have. But because there's such a huge factor in terms of the sibling rivalry and then those issues, we got to do this family style. We have to have like kind of a family therapy session, and that actually is a benefit in two ways. One, they've shown that they can have communication without violence. It has happened. That's a good thing. So we know that they can talk. And two, if any crap goes down, I know that I can rely on Thor to back me up and save my butt. I need that, to be honest with you. There's got to be some way to help Loki recognize that his lies are incredibly destructive, and it doesn't matter what he gets. Like, there's really no profit to be made in the destruction of the universe if that's ultimately what happens. So I would need some sort of gauge as well, and we've already discussed a person that would be really ideal for that, and that's Verity. I would use her as kind of like almost like a lie. I don't know what you call it, a lieometer, whatever. I mean, that's something where I can start calling him out on different points that either are detrimental to other people, which he may not care as much about, but definitely detrimental to himself. If I can get those, I think that's where we would really get progress.
Well, maybe it could be a situation where he's chained to Verity through those Uru chains. Maybe Odin could bring them back, or Thor could bring them back, depending on whether or not Odin is in Odin sleep or he's dead. But chain Loki to Verity with the Uru chains, and then see where that goes.
Do you want to enter comic book psychiatry residency? Because that is brilliant. Like, you could really work with that, man. I like the way you're thinking. This is great.
Well, I pay attention when you speak, so okay. I pick up on things. Now, the out of universe treatment, if you strip away the powers and the shape-shifting and the brother who can summon thunder, I don't think it's a stretch to say that there are certainly people out there who have a dysfunctional relationship with their sibling and are pathological liars, not compulsive liars, although I'm sure there are those as well, who have damaged their relationship with their families, siblings, parents, what have you, because of their lies. So this is not anything, I'm sure, that you haven't seen in your years of practice. How do you treat that type of situation?
So when it comes to family dynamics and someone who's constantly lying, we're going to need a gauge, as I've already mentioned, but we're not going to have Verity. The good news is family knows family. They're going to know that person better than anybody else. So you try and do your best to get some background because information ahead of time is incredibly powerful. How else are you going to call someone out on their lies? Now, in this case, the person usually isn't on a Loki level in terms of trying to get what they want, so you don't necessarily have to worry about them being quote-unquote evil. It's more along the lines of, okay, what are the results of the things that you say? What are the consequences? And it's much better, instead of just having this as kind of a philosophical conversation, you actually have the person keep a journal, basically a lying journal. You don't even have to call it that. The person doesn't even have to know that that's what they're doing, but you just help them identify. It seems like some of the things that you say versus the way other people are interpreting them or the actual consequences of what you're saying are different. Let's see how often that happens, because awareness of it in a way that yes, they were being manipulative, but they may have thought they were doing it for good reasons, or they were doing it because they were trying to protect themselves from something. But you got to get to the reason why they're doing it. The only way that you're going to be able to do that is for them to have the direct evidence. And often, the therapist doesn't have to say anything at that point, because usually these people are incredibly intelligent and they're able to recognize, like, whoa, wait a minute, why is this not matching up? And so when that happens, with the encouragement of a supportive family, you're going to end up with progress. And I think that's incredibly important to mention the supportive family, because often what happens in these situations, the person, starts to feel bad about themselves, because although they may have had, we've heard this story, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. That person didn't view themselves as being wrong. They thought that they were doing the right thing at all times and could say anything that would get them the result.
Every villain is the hero in their own story.
Exactly. Family support is key, because their point is, hey, you may have made some mistakes and you may have intentionally done some things that we didn't like, but that doesn't mean you're unlovable. You have to make sure that the other people aren't completely distancing themselves, because once that happens, things get a lot more difficult. We're going to start dealing with more isolation, loneliness, and things will spiral. But as long as you keep that support, because I'm really tying these two together, as long as there's a bond where people feel like they can be honest about themselves, they'll be able to be honest with others. And usually family is the best way to start.
Fascinating. So I guess my follow-up question to that would be then, with respect to the starting to feel bad, where do you draw the line or step in, if at all, to prevent narcissistic injury? Because I know that was something that we had addressed in an earlier episode, where now they start to feel bad and realize, oh my God, I lie to everyone. I lie all the time. I'm lying to myself. I am a horrible person. I do nothing but create problems. Is that a very legitimate possibility or outcome of the lie journal? And if so, how do you get them to get to the point of self-reflection without reaching narcissistic injury?
You're absolutely right. That's a great point. It is definitely a possibility. Having said that, as the therapist, yes, you do intervene by giving examples of, for example, as we have said on numerous occasions, you can find an example in every human being of things that they've done that either are at least not negative. I apologize for being that nihilistic, but first start with not negative, and then I'm sure at some point you can find examples where things were positive. And I'm going to bring family back into that, because often, because of the amount of time that they spent with this person, they'll recognize it before the therapist recognizes it. And they may be the ones that point out that they're noticing the change in the person. That gives the opportunity for the therapist to intervene before it gets to the point of severe narcissistic injury and depression.
Okay. All right. It was just when you were describing that, I thought that was certainly a potential outcome of it. And I just wanted to interject with that, before it got to the point where, like I said, it was a very real thing. So now we take all of this, all of the things that we've discussed, and we get to see what would happen if Loki were on Dr. Issues' couch.
Hello, Loki. I'm Dr. Issues.
Hello, Doctor.
And we're starting off condescending. Nice. I'm just here to help.
There's nothing you can do to help me, unless you plan on opening the door to the cell and releasing me.
Well, hey, as long as you're not considered a danger to society, I'd be happy to. But clearly we're nowhere near that point.
Society is a danger to itself. I'm merely here to alleviate the suffering you mortals subject yourselves to on a daily basis.
And your means to accomplish this is through constant deceit? Look, don't take me for such a fool.
I take you all for such fools. What makes my deceit any different from that of any of your current leaders? Human nature is to lie. I'm simply better at it than you.
Then I won't beat you at your own game. But are you telling me that there's no benefit to honesty?
Not to you. Your honesty, however, benefits me. as I know precisely how to manipulate you. So please, by all means, continue to be honest.
Okay. If there's no improvement in your actions or your words, then you'll suffer an unfortunate fate from powers that I can't control. Is that honest enough for you?
If you mean to threaten me with imprisonment, know that I have escaped far stricter chains than these before. And if you're referring to my dear brother, I have bested him enough to know his weaknesses as well.
Okay, that brings up a thought. If you've escaped worse and beaten your brother, then how is it you're still here?
My machinations are more than mere parlor tricks. For every action you take against me, I have considered thrice-fold counteractions to ensure my victory.
So if I choose to do nothing and walk away...
No, that's not how it's supposed to... No, come back here!
Well, I am a man of my word.
Return at once, you impudent fool! That's not how this was supposed to end!
You know, you started off a little dangerously there with some of these patients, but lately you've been on a pretty solid streak. You've managed to survive, not cause a whole lot of property damage. So I think you've really started to find the niche and find what works with these patients.
Hey, sometimes with doctors, that's why we call it practice.
Womp womp. So I can't even hate on that. That's a very legitimate thing. So that's going to just about do it for this week. So next week's episode, once again tying in with the release of a film, is now we're finally going to get around to doing Deadpool. I know we were supposed to technically do him this week, or no, we were supposed to do him next week anyway. We were supposed to do Booster this week.
Oh, well, Booster gets relegated to the back seat, as he should be.
Man, just every time we bring up Booster. And you're the one who suggested that we do the episode about him in the first place.
He is an awesome, lame character. Yes, that is exactly what I meant to say.
I can't hate, because that's how a lot of people would describe Moon Knight. So next week is going to be Deadpool, to tie in with the release of the hopefully hilarious Deadpool 2. I've seen the trailers. It looks hilarious. I just hope it's as funny as the first one is. And then we'll do Booster Gold. And then we're going to follow up Booster with a reader suggestion who I'm pretty sure was on our list of heroes and villains to do. But thanks to Robbie's suggestion and post on our Facebook page, we're going to do Victor Freeze. We're going to do good old Mr. Freeze from DC Comics. And I think that's going to be a really fascinating episode, if only because I get to do research by watching the Batman animated series and reading some of the comics, and that's never a bad thing.
Yeah, I'm just glad that I finally get to chill during one of these podcasts.
Just cool out.
Uh-oh.
It'll be nice to talk about him.
I can't believe I just opened this up. Oh,
yes,
my
you
goodness.
Did. You fool.
You made fun of me for the Titanic references and all that, and then you go ahead and you do this, right? Okay.
Because I'm the one controlling the board.
Yeah.
No, but it's going to be a fun episode. I think Deadpool is going to be great.
Oh, yes.
And then I think
you're going to be shockingly surprised at how good Booster Gold is too. Okay. I hate on the guy because I love him. I mean, most people are saying, who on earth is that? Believe it or not, he controls way more than people realize.
Then we get into Mr. Freeze, which proves our further point. Interact with us. Make character suggestions. This Loki episode was kind of a synergistic decision between some of the decisions that Doc and I made about which character to do next, and a reader suggestion. So, Georgia, I hope you enjoyed this episode. And then Mr. Freeze is a reader suggestion, so...
Right, and actually Deadpool, because I did do a little bit of research, Deadpool is very reminiscent of what I've read about X, which was another character that was suggested a while ago. We didn't forget about that. Unfortunately, we can't do everything all at once.
Yeah, we can't do every character every week, but we do love hearing your suggestions. We do love the input, so please email us, capesonthecouch@gmail.com. Tweet at us, capesonthecouch. We have a Facebook page, Capes on the Couch. If you really like what you hear, rate and subscribe to the extent that your provider or whatever platform you listen to us on allows ratings and reviews. We'd love to read the comments that you folks have week after week with episodes as we continue to grow. Hopefully in the future, we'll have additional ways that you can contact us. We are looking at a number of additional options. We're also looking at some possible guests in the future. Hopefully we can say more about that at a later time. Not just yet, because I don't want to count any chickens before they're hatched. And as always, we're found on the Libsyn Network. Capesonthecouch.live is the website. You can find us on Google Play, iTunes, Stitcher, TuneIn, and YouTube. So, Doc, anything you want to say before we close?
Just by next week, I want everyone to have eaten the chimichanga.
Yes, chimichanga. And get a unicorn and watch Golden Girls, because B. Arthur is the bomb. Was the bomb. Rest in peace. Betty White's still around, though. For Doc Issues, I'm Anthony Sitko. Thank you so much. We'll see you next week.
Capes on the Couch podcast is for entertainment purposes only. Dr. Issues is a psychiatrist, but he is not your psychiatrist and does not have knowledge of your individual situation. For any personal mental health concerns, please consult your own healthcare providers. For medical emergencies, please call 911 or the designated number in your area immediately. Remember that you are not alone and help is out there.